Hello, I'm Brigantia, Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Friday. Welcome back to the ongoing series of romance and modern mythology. This is, of course, another spooky couples edition. And this week we are going to be looking at the classic movie monster, the Wolfman, and his various lady loves. Now, at the beginning of the 1941 movie, there's a character called Lawrence Talbot. He's played by Lon Chaney Jr. He became the werewolf really through no fault of his own. He was an all-around nice guy. He was someone who was mechanically inclined. And when we meet him at the beginning of the movie, he's coming back to the family home. He and his father are trying to make their relationship right and, just get everything just back on track. During this time, he takes a shine to a local girl named Gwen, who was played by Evelyn Ankers, and he actively begins pursuing her. They end up taking a trip to the local fortune teller, and during the course of this trip, he's bitten by a werewolf, and that ultimately results in him becoming a werewolf himself. Now, Talbot is absolutely horrified by what he's become, and he's actually taking steps to try and protect Gwen, even giving her a charm for that purpose, a charm that was meant to help him. Eventually, he's killed, albeit not completely, and when he's revived in subsequent films with very little explanation, all he really wants to do is either be released from this curse and healed and cured, or he wants to end it all. He wants to die and be released from the curse that way. Now, in most of his major films, there's a different girl each time, but the underlying issue is always the same, whether it's Gwen in Wolfman in 1941, or Ilonka, who was played by Elena Verdugo in The House of Frankenstein in 1944, or Malizia, played by Martha O'Driscoll in House of Dracula in 1945. And it's the same difficulty each time. In all of his romances, it's his status as a werewolf. That is the big thing that's getting in the way. And it's the knowledge that he has seriously injured and even killed people while he's in his wolf state. And he's fearful of that. He feels guilty about that because he's a good man. Good men don't go around rejoicing in the fact that they've killed people, albeit involuntarily. But he's also deeply afraid for his lady love's well-being, and you can see that in all of these relationships. Now, when Gwen was the lady on the screen, her reaction, and honestly his, it was a stage of disbelief. Just could not deal with the situation at all, could barely acknowledge its reality. And then once we move on to Ilonka, this is when everything was more in a stage of acceptance of, okay, this actually is happening, it is real, and there has to be some sort of solution. And unfortunately, that solution, the conclusion that both the Wolfman and Ilonka came to is that, he needed to be killed. And, ultimately that's what she tried to do. And then by the time we get to Malizia, he was more so in the stage of hoping for a cure. Her character was actually a nurse for the doctor whose help he was going to. And ultimately she was involved in helping him recover from his werewolf curse. It was a successful treatment, and he was able to essentially return to a normal life at this stage. But throughout this whole journey, Lawrence Talbot, he is tormented, which is understandable considering the circumstances. And for all the nonsense we hear about men in previous generations not being allowed to show emotion, the reality is that Lon Chaney Jr. gave a very emotionally compelling performance whenever he played the Wolfman. You felt like whenever you were watching him that you were just inside of his heart, almost experiencing the emotions alongside with him. He absolutely hated the beast within. He hated how he felt when the wolf took over. All he wanted was peace, release, a return to normalcy and stability. And each of the women he was attracted to in his movies, they all represented the hope of a normal life. Some more attainable than others, but it was, love, marriage, family, getting back to what he was, or being able to move forward in a manner that he could find morally acceptable. Lawrence Talbot, he was essentially a normal man who just had the misfortune of getting unwillingly caught up in extraordinary circumstances that were completely beyond his control. Now, one of the reasons why I like highlighting the Wolfman and also pointing out the difficulties that he had in his love life is because fear of what lies within us is a very relatable insecurity, and it actively gets in the way of many people's relationships. Because we all have troubles, Many of us have trauma in our past, and I think it's self-evident and absolutely beyond dispute about how these experiences affect our relationships, especially romantic relationships. Sometimes our pain, whether it's something that's occurring in the present, something that occurred in the past that we haven't really wrestled with or dealt with successfully, it can bring out our very worst qualities. In other words, that beast within. We can get caught up in the false belief that we're incapable of love or having a loving relationship, or that we're even unworthy of being loved. And the problems this idea causes are obvious, and there's no shortages of examples of how this makes underlying issues worse. I mean, whether we can look in the mirror and see, oh, yeah, this really has done a number on me, or we're looking at other people we've known in our lives, like, I can tell you what's going on there. This is something that is a very real and very visceral thing to us. We understand uh, his struggle, and it's what makes it so compelling to us. It's why it's so relatable. We are not physically transforming into wolves when our demons get the better of us, but we understand what it is to fear those inner demons and not know if we're going to be capable of controlling them, let alone successfully dealing with them or being able to do the necessary shadow work to, get it all back in its proper place. Another interesting thing about the Wolfman story is the idea of his lover becoming the healer. Now, there is a school of thought that really states that expecting a romantic partner to help us heal from past wounds is unfair to them. And I don't completely dismiss that idea. There are some things that are best dealt with in the therapeutic setting with a doctor patient relationship, and there are things that only really professionals can really assist with in a meaningful way. But on the other hand, I think it is equally unreasonable to attempt to go through life with the expectation that we can't lean on our spouses or our lovers or allow them to lean on us for support, for perspective, and yes, even for helping us heal from wounds to the spirit. If there is no mutual exchange of this kind, doesn't that point to something being missing in the relationship? Even to the point of it being a violation of terms of what being in a relationship or in a marriage really means. Certainly, we have a right to expect that, with an intimate relationship that's, body and soul, mind and heart, the totality of your being, something that is a long term love affair or something that is a successful marriage, the idea that that person wouldn't also help us with our own internal struggles, that just seems really odd to me. And it seems like one of those modern affectations that, for all the preaching about how enlightened this is, that actually it is something that actively destroys relationships and marriages and ultimately families. So make of that what you will. So in the House of Dracula, the Wolfman does get his wish. He is released from the curse. He's no longer a werewolf. He is free to love and be loved. The nurse is right there with him. He's going to have his happily ever after. It's an ending of hope and also an ending where you are receiving rewards that have been long sought after. And, we're watching and we're rooting for Talbot, but we also find ourselves identifying with his emotional struggles. And so that ending of him getting what he ultimately wanted, what he cherished above all, the ability to live as a normal human life, that is also a message of hope for us as the audience. We are more than our pain. We are more than our mistakes. We are more than our struggles. We can love and we can be loved in return. And I wonder, because this movie, The House of Dracula, it was made in 1945, and that was right at the end of the Second World War. I do wonder if maybe we got such a hopeful ending and such a good ending for him, specifically because it was the end of the war. People had had a lot of real life trauma on a scale that you simply can't understand or even describe to anyone who hasn't been through that themselves. Um, they were wanting something else. They were wanting, and it's a change of pace from that. They didn't want horror in a fantasy setting. They had plenty of horror in real lives. And of course, with so many people returning from war, whether they're active fighters or they were gathering intelligence or they were in the medical field helping the troops, all of it that was being active participants in the horror People wanted something different. So I wonder if the idea of the happy ending for the Wolfman is perhaps a nod to people who were returning from that war theater and saying that there is something better that is lying ahead for you. You are not going to be defined by your horrible experiences. Your life is not going to be dominated by this thing. You are going to be able to go back and have your family, be with your spouse, and have a life that's worth living. So, for a movie that got panned at the time and only gets a very lukewarm love now, I think there's a lot going on here, and I think there's a lot more going on with the Wolfman character and why he takes such a root in the psyches. And actually, this is the last of our classic movie monsters that we'll be looking at this month. I hope you've enjoyed it thus far. Next week, we're going to be discussing Gomez and Morticia Addams, because why not? It's fun. It's October. They're spooky. Who better to end our month with, and who better to conclude the Samhain season with? But I hope that as you've been watching the different relationship analysis of all these classic movie monsters, I hope you see why I find myself so enthralled by them and why I think they have relevance beyond entertainment. Our stories, our myths, our legend, they take up so much room in our heads. They relate to us on a visceral way that, you know, just, biographical histories never will, because it's all of our hopes, it's all of our fears on high, amplified to this extraordinary degree, and we're watching it all play out. I think that's why sometimes these struggles with these monsters hit us on such a personal level, and why honestly people who dismiss it just as fiction are really missing out. But I think that's it for now. Come back next week because I have lots to say about Gomez and Morticia. They are such fun. It's going to be good. But for now, I think that's enough for this video. I will see you in another one. Bye.